Hi everyone, Kathleen here from the careers team. I'm super excited today to be talking to you about everyone's favorite topic, salary negotiations and navigating offers. This can be a really intimidating conversation for lots of folks to have, specifically salary negotiations, but it's so important. I don't think you need me to tell you why it's important to negotiate your salary, but this is a really expected part of the job process, and companies will be expecting you to negotiate your salaries. So by going into the conversations feeling really prepared and ideally knowing how to use multiple offers as leverage for negotiating your salaries, you can make some pretty amazing things happen for yourself as a candidate that you might not even think are possible if you just are prepared for the conversations and go in knowing what to say and when to say it and how to say it. So we're going to dig into that today, and hopefully you leave today's lesson all feeling more confident and prepared to navigate these tricky conversations and make some pretty cool stuff happen for yourselves in your final stages. So let's jump right in. All right. So the goals for today, I want you to leave this lesson knowing how to manage multiple different job offers professionally and to leverage them as a negotiation tool. I want you to know how to conduct market research to estimate your value as an employee in the field. And you should be, excuse me, you should be able to bring basic negotiation strategies into a variety of different compensation conversations, ranging everywhere from phone screens to the absolute final stages of the interview process when you're getting ready to accept a role with a company. So first things first, balancing multiple offers. This is objectively a good thing. You want to have multiple job offers. This gives you way more power as a candidate. And when you have multiple offers, you can use one to negotiate for another. But it can also be a little bit tricky. Like, what if you get a job offer at company A the day after you get invited for a phone screen at company B, and company B has your absolute dream job? Can you delay giving company A an answer while you interview at company B? Can you accept the offer with company A and then back out if company B ends up giving you an offer later? And then what if you decline company A, but then you don't end up getting the offer with company B, and then you don't have any job at all? These are tricky questions to think about, and these are things that you will have to think about if you do find yourself getting offers that aren't perfectly aligned at the same time, which often is the case. And sometimes there just isn't going to be an easy answer here. But we're going to cover how to navigate these tricky situations so that you at least feel like you are empowered with the knowledge and the tactics and strategies to balance multiple offers if you find yourself in this position. So while you're interviewing, it's really common to be asked by the interviewer if you're interviewing elsewhere. This can throw you off a little bit, and it kind of makes you feel like there might be something wrong with applying to multiple companies. There isn't. But interviewers are asking this question because they want to get a feel for how you're prioritizing your search and how you might be evaluating your options. So a wrong way to answer this question is to just be really blunt and say something like, yep, and I've been invited to interviews at 6 other companies so far. And that's not going to send a really great impression about your enthusiasm, your excitement for the role that you're currently interviewing for to the person asking you this question. So a better way to answer this without lying, because there's no reason to lie, and in general, you never want to lie during an interview at any point. But a way to answer this strategically and to kind of flip it back on the interviewer as a compliment is something like, as I consider my next steps after Landa School, I've been considering multiple different opportunities, but I'm really interested in how your company is addressing X in the market. And I'm particularly excited about how my skills in X fit into your need for Y. So I'm really looking forward to talking more about how I might be a fit for your team. And by doing that, you're saying, yeah, I am open to other things, but I'm really excited about this one. And I'm here talking to you because I see that I bring value to your team and I could be a really good fit. And you're not telling the interviewer that this job is your first choice, but you are making them feel special. And that's just a general tactic that you want to do when interviewing, when negotiating at all points. You want to make it about the company that you're talking to and make them feel like the biggest priority in your professional life, even though chances are they probably aren't. If you find yourself in a situation where you have two offers at once, this is an ideal situation. You want to be here. You can take some time to evenly compare the two offers and figure out which one you're most excited about. You might have a really obvious answer, like you could have really been really excited about one and the other one just kind of was your backup. So then it's probably an obvious choice for you. Or both might sound pretty good and you can't really decide. So there's a couple ways to approach this depending on what the scenario is. So if one offer has better salary or benefits than the other, and this doesn't matter if your first choice company has better salary or benefits than the other, or your second choice company has better salary or benefits than the other, you always want to negotiate both and see what you can get. Because your second choice job might come back with a really impressive counter offer once they know you have an offer elsewhere, and that might actually push them into your first choice position. So a way that you can respond to this is something along the lines of, thank you so much for the offer. I'm really excited about this opportunity, and I loved learning more about how you're currently focused on X. I wanted to see if there was any wiggle room in the compensation package. I recently was offered another position at company B with this salary and these benefits. But like I said, I'm really excited about the opportunity to work on X with your company and think that this would be an ideal fit for both me and the team. So I'm hoping that we can find a way to close this gap. And the company, if they really like you and if they're offering you a job, they've decided that they really like you, you've earned a spot on the team as far as they're concerned, they're probably going to try to come back with something higher if they can. And sometimes they won't be able to, but if they have any way of offering you more than what the other company's offering you, they're going to do it because they're going to know that you might like both of those companies equally, and they want to make it a little bit more attractive for you to stay with them and pick them. But you might find yourself in the situation where the two offers are comparable. And you want to respond to this in a lot of ways very similarly to how you respond to the other scenario. But you shift it a little bit. It's not about closing the gap. It's about basically saying like, yeah, I got a similar offer elsewhere. You maybe want to seem a little bit less enthusiastic about the company that you're talking to. You don't want to make it seem like they're your first choice. You want to leave it a little vague and up in the air so they don't know which company you prefer to work at, where all things completely equal. And so you kind of put it on them and say, like, what can you do for me? Is there any wiggle room here? I'm trying to figure out what's the best fit. Like, convince me I should pick you. You obviously don't want to say something that directly, but if you structure your response like how these two paragraphs are structured, it's a direct way of asking, but it's still very professional. It's courteous. It's more exploring different opportunities. It makes it more of a conversation. You never want to treat a negotiation, either when you're balancing offers or when you're just working on one offer, like like combat. It should always be a conversation. Ask questions, seek to understand, gently push back, be firm, but you don't have to be really aggressive in how you approach things. And so these are two ways that you could respond to two different scenarios when you get an offer at the same time or within the same week. Another situation you might find yourself in that is less ideal but is more common is getting an interview or an offer while you're still interviewing elsewhere. And how you handle this will depend on where you are with the company that you're still interviewing at. If you're in final stages elsewhere, you can ask company A. Company A is the company that has already given you the offer, and company B is the company you're still interviewing with. Then ask company A to have time to think about the offer. It's totally professional to ask for about a week. You can ask for longer. Most companies really need to know within a week or so. They might have other candidates they want to get back to if you're not interested. So while you're their first choice, they're hiring for a job because they need somebody to fill that job, so they can't wait around forever. And they might say, we can't give you a week. We really need to know by, 2 days from now. So you can ask, you might not get what you want. And then as soon as you ask for that time, immediately go to company B and let them know, be like, hey, I got an offer elsewhere. I'm like, this is my first choice though. You're my first choice. And I really want to be on this team. I'm really excited about this opportunity. I know we're still in final stages of interviewing. Is there anything that I can do to facilitate the process or clarify my qualifications for this position? And sometimes that'll just give them the push they need to work with HR more quickly, get your paperwork done, and all that. So it's always good to ask. The tricky part is when you're really early in the process with one company, or the company that's making you the offer isn't willing to give you enough time to work with the other company to try to expedite the interview process on their end. So this is hard. You're kind of faced with a dilemma here. Do you decline the offer from company A in the hopes that you get an offer with company B? Or do you accept the offer and then withdraw your application from the preferred company? And what you don't want to do here is accept the job with company A and then plan on leaving if you get an offer from company B. That can just be a really badly burned professional bridge and is not is kind of a professional faux pas. So you can consider things like, what are the odds of getting an offer from company B for your dream job? Are you really highly qualified for that role? Did you click with your interviewers, the people you've talked to so far? Do you know a couple people at the company who are vouching for you and helping you get a foot in the door there? These things might increase your confidence about your ability to get an offer from company B. Whereas if you are maybe a little underqualified, or you don't know anybody there, or you were a little nervous in the last interview and you aren't sure how well you did, these might lower your confidence in whether or not you're going to get an offer with company B. There's really no way of knowing. So you kind of have to make an educated guess based on the data that you do have. And then whatever your decision is, own it. And you might make a mistake, and you might realize later on, once it's too late, that you've made a really big mistake. And it happens. It's a learning opportunity. And no matter what, you just need to own it at the end of the day, and do your best to navigate this as professionally as possible, thinking both about your professional reputation, but also about the impact that you might be having on the company. The ideal situation is if you get an offer while you're still interviewing elsewhere, and the offer you get is for your dream job and the job that you wanted more. And if that happens, you just politely withdraw your name from, once you've always finalize everything with the offer first before you withdraw from any interview process, just in case something happens. But once you've finalized, you've signed your paperwork, formally accepted the offer, then you go back to any companies whom you're still interviewing with and just tell them, thank you so much for your time. I've accepted an offer elsewhere, and I would like to withdraw my application. I would love to stay in touch for potential future opportunities. And they'll hopefully be disappointed because they really liked you, but will absolutely understand that is part of the process. So what happens if you've started in a job and you're working there and it's been less than a year, but you hear from your dream company, and maybe they finally got back to you about an application you submitted months before, or maybe a recruiter just finds you on LinkedIn and says, hey, we think you'd be a good fit. Or somebody who works there reaches out to you and says that there's an opening on a team and they think you would be an awesome fit for it. This is a really tricky situation because, especially when you're starting out in your career, you want to stay in a job for at least a year. And there's some exceptions to this. If you're in a toxic work environment, or your manager is borderline abusive, or your team is just impossible to work with, or if the job ends up being completely different than what it was advertised during the interview process. These are appropriate and professional reasons to leave a job after less than a year. But those things aside, when you're building your reputation in a new field, having longer terms of employment shows that you are reliable, that you have the skills to hold a job. If an employer looks at your LinkedIn or your resume and sees multiple stints of short employment, then it might signal to them that you aren't super reliable, or they might question whether or not you left those jobs or if you were let go from those jobs because of performance. And then also just the impact on your professional reputation. It costs employers thousands and thousands of dollars to hire new people. And especially if you're backfilling a role that somebody left, it's probably going to take months before they can onboard you and have you adding value to the team. And so that's time and money that the company has lost, and they've invested in you, trusting that you're going to add that value back. And if you leave the company after less than a year, chances are your cost to the company is greater than the benefit that you provided. And so some managers are really understanding when this happens and they're supportive of the transition. Others are going to be pretty ticked off, and which is understandable from their perspective. And so it's important just to consider your professional reputation. You don't want people talking about you as an unreliable employee or somebody who will jump ship for the next best thing. That's not the reputation you want to build early in your career. So really recommend sticking with the company for at least a year unless things are really, really negative or toxic. If you can always ask your dream company if you can defer until later. Sometimes, especially for bigger companies that are hiring all the time or growing companies, they might be like, yeah, totally, we'll definitely have an opportunity just like this one open up again 6 months from now. Stay in touch with us. We'll let you know when other opportunities come up. And this might not even be an issue. You can put in your time with your first company and then be ready to move on and be an even stronger employee at your dream company now that you have some experience under your belt. No matter what, you don't want to bring this up to your current employer. You don't want to try to leverage it as a negotiation tool. This is something that you can do after you've been with the company for a few years or when you're in a more senior position. But when you're starting out, you don't want to say, 6 months into a new job, hey, I'm getting contacted from another company, like convince me to stay here. That's not a negotiation tactic that works early in your career and early on at a new employer. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your choice. You need to make the choice that is best for you. So I am not trying to tell you what you should or shouldn't do, but I would consider your own reputation and also the fact that you are an ambassador for Lambda School. And so just consider the impact of your decision and make the choice that's right for you once you've considered all of the variables available to you. So once you get an offer, how do you go about negotiating? The most important thing is to know your value. That is the first step to negotiating a salary. And this is important because you won't always have multiple offers to go off of. You won't always be able to use one to get a better salary or better benefits from the other. And so it's important to know your value. And that's going to vary a lot depending on not just where you live, but also what industry you're in and what company you're working for. By knowing your value, you'll prevent yourself from selling yourself short and setting yourself up for failure by asking for less money. But you'll also prevent yourself from overselling yourself and sounding unprepared and unknowledgeable to an employer. And we'll cover ahead where you can go to do this research. But preparation is key, and just understanding the impact that different industries have on your earning potential is also important. So to prepare, you want to check Glassdoor, PayScale, ZipRecruiter, and just do a simple Google search for how much does a blank make in blank field in blank region. And Glassdoor is my go-to #1 resource, but it shouldn't be the only one. You want to use multiple resources to help you get a well-rounded idea of your desired field, because Glassdoor relies completely on self-reported information from people working at the company. And so you might only see 3 salaries on Glassdoor for the company that you're interviewing at. Chances are that's not going to give you a super accurate or reliable picture of what you could expect to make in that company. So PayScale and ZipRecruiter are good resources. Google's a good resource. But another thing that you want to consider is not just how much people make in the field or in your area, but you also want to look at yourself and your own value. So you may have skills or experience that are unique and desired by an employer because they're value adds that not every candidate has. That increases your value. If you have intimate knowledge of the industry or of a company's product, those are things that increase your value. If you've done a project before that closely resembles one of the main projects that you would be working on in this new role, then that increases your value. So as you go through the interview process, take notes along the way and look through these notes later and just make a note or highlight as you go through your notes anything that you have a strong background or skill set in. And then when it comes to negotiating your offer, you can say, hey, I know that when I spoke to so-and-so about X project, they mentioned that Y skills were really needed right now. And I actually have a ton of experience in that through this project that I did with my Build Weeks group at Lambda School. And from all of our conversations, I have exact transferable experience in everything that would be needed to work on this project. So I think I could bring a lot of value to the team early on. Is there any way that we can talk about the compensation just to recognize the value that I'm bringing to the team in this specific regard? That's a way that you can negotiate, and that has nothing to do with the local market value. You're just negotiating based off your own skills and value add. So negotiation strategies. Negotiations can be stressful. How do you start them? Lots of people don't even do it because it's so stressful. You do not want to let this be you. You could miss out on literally tens of thousands of dollars over the course of your career by not negotiating just in your first job, even if you negotiate in every job after that. And that's because salaries frequently, as you gain more experience, your salaries frequently compound over time. So the higher you start, the higher your earning potential. And negotiation is just as much a part of the job process as interviewing or submitting your resume or doing a phone screen, all of that. So companies expect you to do it. They're coming in ready for you to negotiate. And if they know you're going to negotiate, chances are they're going to try to offer you on the lower end of the spectrum. Rarely does a company have only one set amount budgeted for a role. It's usually a range. And so they're going to start on the lower end of that range, knowing that you're going to try to negotiate and end up higher. That way they're not going outside of their range. And of course, they hope that you won't negotiate because then they get your skills and your labor and your value for way less than if they were to offer you a higher amount to begin with. And negotiation will never jeopardize a job offer unless you go about it in a really unprofessional or rude or disrespectful way. Politely negotiating and having a conversation about the compensation will never make a company say, like, no, we're not going to hire you. We can't believe you would ask that. That just doesn't happen. And if a company does do that, then I can guarantee it is not a company that you would want to work at anyway. So some tips. The first one, always, always, always negotiate. That's what I was just saying. It's an expected part of the job process. Employers have a range. You'll never lose an offer. And once you get an offer from a company, this is when you have the most leverage and power. Up until that point, all of the power has been on the company. You've been proving to the company that, yes, you can do the job. Yes, you can fit in with the team. Yes, you'll be a good, reliable employee who everyone will like to work with. And once they make an offer, that's them saying, we want you, you're our first choice. And so then the power shifts from the company to you. And then you can say like, okay, you want me, I'm here. Let's talk about ways that you can show just how valuable I am to this company and this team. Like, let's talk about this and find something that works for both of us. So once you're in a job, you don't really have that negotiation power. It's when you get the offer before you accept it where you have the most leverage, so use it. Another tip, do your research. Be prepared. Glassdoor, PayScale, ZipRecruiter, all of those sites are your friend. You want to start with a simple Google search of how much does X developer get paid in Y city / town / region, and just see what comes up. Try to narrow it down by company, but you might find, especially if you're applying to smaller companies, that there isn't enough data to get a really good idea of what you could be making at that company. And then you always want to consider the local job market and economy and talent pool. If you live in Jacksonville and ask for a salary that somebody in Washington, D.C. makes, the recruiter won't take you seriously. But similarly, if you live in an area where the cost of labor is really high, like I live in the Bay Area, labor costs a lot here. So if I were to go into a negotiation and ask for the national average for my job title, chances are I would really be underselling myself. So it's important to know where you live and what the value of labor is in that local area, just to get an idea of your baseline. Third tip is they often start in the phone screen. This is really normal. This might be one of the first questions that you get asked by a recruiter, so be prepared for it. Do your research, have a range in mind. You always want to try to defer the conversation if possible. So I recommend saying something like, I appreciate you asking. From my research about your company, it seems like your offers are in line with the market value, which is great to see, but I would prefer to learn more about the role and expectations of me as an employee throughout the interview process before I would feel comfortable giving out a range for compensation. And that's a good way to professionally say, like, hey, slow down. I'm not ready to give this number yet. And the recruiter should be able to respect that. They might push and really, really want a number. And this is where it's important to have a range and aim high in that range. You don't want to aim too high, but you want to definitely be on the higher end of what is average for the market. Again, taking into consideration your unique value add that you bring as a candidate. So if you live in an area where a junior data scientist makes on average 90 to 100K, it's really appropriate to ask for 95 to 105. So you're going a little bit over the average range, but it's still within reason. And especially if you can back up why you are worth that extra $5,000 on top of the average, then you might be able to get more money than you were expecting initially. But you want to be realistic. If you ask for an amount or a range that is just completely unrealistic for your area, you're going to look unprepared and the employer won't take you seriously. And then you don't want to undersell yourself either, like I said before. And some folks feel like if they don't have work experience in the field or they don't have a 4-year degree in the field, then somehow they're less valuable than candidates who do. If you're getting an offer, then that means the employer has decided that you can do the job, and they should be willing to pay you to do the job as they would pay somebody else, regardless of their previous experience. Most companies have salary bands for roles, and so there will be a limited range that they'll be able to work within for a specific role. And if you meet the job description and you are proved in the interview process that you're a qualified candidate, then you should be in that range just like anybody else. So if somebody who has 30 years of experience is applying, they're probably really overqualified for that role and shouldn't be applying for it. But they shouldn't make tens of thousands of dollars more than you, because at the end of the day, you're getting paid to do a job. And it's about your value as a candidate, but it's also about the value of the job and how much that job is worth in the market at that company. When you do finally have the conversation about negotiation, you want it to be a conversation. It's not a confrontation. And I think the best way to go about this is to just ask questions. You have your priorities and the company has their priorities, and negotiation is just about understanding the other person's or the company's priorities and perspective, and trying to figure out common ground that you have where you can both be really happy. if you get an offer that seems way lower than you were expecting, it's okay to just ask, how did you arrive at that amount? I think questions are one of the best ways to go into a negotiation, because it's a quick way for you to kind of put your piece out there, and then you really put the onus on the employer to answer the question. So you're not trying to sweet talk them, or you don't have to prepare a script. You just ask a simple question and then let them do the talking. So if I got an offer that was way under what I was expecting, I would just ask them, oh, that's really surprising. From my research, that seems lower than what I've seen in the market for comparable positions at similarly sized companies. Could you share a little bit more about how you arrived at that amount? And then they will hopefully provide some context that helps clarify. And then from there, you can negotiate and have a little bit more time to think about what you want to say, and know where they're coming from and what their priorities are. And at the end of the day, you want to put out the range and ask if there's, I think like a nice, gentle, easy way to ask for this is, is there any wiggle room so we can meet somewhere in the middle? Or is there any way that we could close this gap? And there's ways to ask for more money that don't feel demanding. A lot of people think about negotiations as just about the salary, but it's about the entire compensation package, which includes a lot more than the salary. So this can include things like health benefits, dental, vacation time, and sick time, parental leave. If you're planning on starting a family or growing your family, that's huge. Commute time and transit reimbursements, things like that. All of those fall under your compensation package as an employee. So maybe the pay isn't negotiable, but you could possibly negotiate an extra week off, or you could negotiate for more stock options if that's something that your company does. And then you could also negotiate for a performance review at 3 or 6 months, with consideration for a merit increase if your performance is meeting or exceeding expectations. Those are all things that you can negotiate for. And then you want to take at least 24 hours to consider an offer. Even if you get an amazing job offer and you know off the bat that you're going to accept it, don't dive straight into a negotiation. Take time to think about it. You always will have at least 24 hours to consider an offer before needing to give them a final decision. So think about it. Do your research. Make sure you're prepared. Mull it over. Think about all of your priorities. Review all of the benefits. And always, always, always get it in writing. I cannot say this enough. So when you get the initial offer, if they give it to you over the phone, ask them to email it to you so you can review it in writing, you understand the health benefits, you get all the fine print. And then if you negotiate something with the employer, make sure that they update the offer letter to reflect whatever was negotiated. If it's not in writing, then it doesn't exist. And this happened to a former student of mine where she was a contractor, and so she wasn't eligible for benefits, but she was able to negotiate, I think, $500 for education reimbursement. There was a class that she wanted to take at a local college, and it was relevant to her job, and she was able to negotiate with her manager that he would pay for that. And then her manager left 2 months in, and then a few weeks later, registration opened for the class, and she talked to her new manager about it. But her new manager said no, because she was a contractor. So objectively on paper, she wasn't eligible for that benefit. And because it was nowhere in writing that she and her previous manager had agreed on this, her new manager's hands were kind of tied. And he had to put his foot down and say no, and say that he wasn't allowed to do that. And so all of the negotiations happened with her previous manager, verbally, in person. And so when the time came, she wasn't able to take advantage of this thing that she had really prepared hard to negotiate for, and had really fought for, because it was hard for her to do that as a contractor. So always get it in writing, and never sign an offer unless you have reviewed it thoroughly, everything looks good to you, and everything aligns with what you have found in your conversations. So I'm going to pause there so we can go through some practice together on how to research your value as a candidate. So again, Glassdoor is always my first stop when I am looking for a salary range for a field or a specific position. So let's start here with, you want to keep it kind of vague. So even if you're applying for a job that has a really specific title, by keeping it a little bit vaguer but still in the same family, you'll get more results. So let's say I want to see what a data analyst in Cincinnati makes. So I have salary suggested here or selected here, data analyst Cincinnati, and we'll see what comes up. So it looks like the average base pay is a little over $62,000. And Glassdoor is great because it shows you this range of what people make on the low end and on the high end of a specific field. So while I can see that the range goes from 44,000 to 84,000 for a data analyst, I can see that it's much more heavily skewed on the lower end of that. So 62K is the average, but looking at this graph, I can assume that there's a couple outliers of people who just have really high data analyst salaries, and they're skewing the average a little bit higher because they're so much higher than all of the others. So this is good for me to consider. So I would, if I were to go into a negotiation, I would want to see if I can find companies that are in the field that I'm interviewing for. So I can see that there's a few different data analyst roles in the healthcare field. So if I was applying to be a data analyst within the healthcare field, these ranges would be a lot more relevant to me than you know, Access Financial, financial institution. And you can see here that the range is from $47,000 to $130,000, which is not super useful in terms of helping me know what my value is. So I would look at the overall value for the region, but then I would also look at the specific field. And so I see these two people are hourly, so probably not super relevant to look at hourly if I'm applying for a full-time position. But I can see that for these two, for Cincinnati Children's Hospital and Mercy Health, one is 62 to 84 based on two salaries. One is 56 to 62. And so 62 is the high end here, 62 is the low end here. What I'm going to aim for when I ask is I would probably ask for a range of $60,000 to $70,000 a year as a junior in the field. And 70 seems a little bit high for what I could expect to make. Certainly it seems like some people are making that, but there might be people in here who have been data analysts for 5+ years. And so they might be some of the people who are kind of skewing the salaries on the higher end. But I would feel pretty good about asking for that range. And they might come back and say, you know, we only have $55,000 a year budgeted. And just looking through the averages and looking at this graph up here, it seems like $55,000 a year would be a very reasonable offer. But by aiming a little bit higher and asking for 60 to 70,000 and basing it on the research that I did and also tying in any skills or unique value adds that I bring to the role, I might be able to get a little bit more. Maybe they had budgeted 55, but they're willing to get it up to 58. That's an extra $3,000 a year, which makes a big difference. So always try to negotiate, go on the high end. You know, I'm not going to ask for 80 to 90. Even though I see here that it's possible to be a data analyst making 80 to 90, but that's such a small number of people who are actually making that, and chances are they are not juniors. So I'm not going to ask for that much. And then next, what I would do is I would, again, do a simple Google search. How much does a data analyst in Cincinnati make? And I would see what I could find here. Let's see what PayScale says. So this says 56, so it's a little bit lower than what was on Glassdoor. So that's good for me to consider. And this goes by median, not by average. So that's also important to think about as well. I'm pretty sure that Glassdoor uses mean in order to calculate that midpoint. But I see a similar range from low 40s to stops in high 70s instead of the low 80s. So pretty comparable. But I would still feel okay about asking for if not 60 to 70, then 60 to 65 based on looking at this. And then ZipRecruiter here says $64,000 a year. So and then I can see the range is much broader than it is on Glassdoor. It goes all the way from 24,000 to over 115,000. So this is good data for me. And I feel pretty confident about my original thought about asking for 60 to 70 or 60 to $65,000 a year if I were going into a data analyst role in the Cincinnati area. So let's do one more. So we did a data analyst in Cincinnati. Let's do a UX designer in Dover. See what comes up. Okay. So it looks like there isn't enough reports to show the salary distribution, which is interesting because there's over 6,000 salaries here, but that's just good to know. So I don't have quite as much data to go off of on Glassdoor as I did with the data analyst role. But I see that the average base pay is a little over $71,000. So that's great for me to know. And if I scroll down, this one's a little bit more discrete than the data analyst one. So this is just good for me to consider. It doesn't have employers, which makes it harder for me to know what I'm looking for. And then when I look here, I can see it's actually pulling in names, places that are not in the Delaware region. So this might mean that there just isn't enough data from the Dover, Delaware area to know what a UX designer there would make. So what I would then do is go back to my trusty Google search. How much does a UX designer in Delaware make? Delaware is a small enough state that I'll just branch out to all of Delaware and not focus on Dover specifically. And here we have a ZipRecruiter link. This has a little bit more data in it for us. So this says that as of pretty recently, April 20th, 2019, the average annual pay for a UI UX designer in Delaware is $87,000. So this is helpful for me to know. This gives me a little bit more data. Again, I see that it's a less dramatic skew towards the lower end than with the data analyst role, but I can see that it is a little bit more skewed on the lower end than it is on the higher end. So we can assume that there are a couple really high paying jobs in here that are bringing up the overall average. But now I have an idea of what I could expect to make. And let's go back to Glassdoor and see if just doing Delaware would help narrow things down. So we still don't have specific company reports, but we can see that it changed from about 70,000 to 90,000. So I'm seeing here 87,000. These two numbers line up more or less. So this is good for me to consider. So chances are that I can make a pretty solid ask if I'm applying for a UX designer role in Delaware for, I would say, 85 to 95. And if you can look at what people who work at the company where you're interviewing, what they get paid, then it might give you an idea of how that company's pay compares to other companies in the region. Another thing that you can do is you can look at areas that have a similar economic distribution or job market as Delaware. and you could see if there is more data for other places in the country that have more data points to go off of. And without having to find specific data for Delaware, you might be able to get an idea of what would be reasonable to ask for based on comparable markets. So this is how you start researching your value. And your assignment for this Friday is to go through this process. So if you have a couple different roles that you're interested in, that you're thinking of going for after you graduate, then do it for all of the roles that you're thinking of. You don't have to get like super, super specific with the job title, but you want to make sure that you're covering all of your bases. And for those of you who are very focused on one type of job after you graduate, then just focus on that one. So for your PM, you should send them at least one job title and the research that you did, where you found the pay range, whether it's PayScale, ZipRecruiter, Glassdoor, etc., and an overview of what you can expect to make, and what is an appropriate range for you to ask for if you were to be offered a role in the field. And then along with that, I want you to list out any projects, skills, or experiences that you have that you think could be really valuable to an employer. And this list will vary once you're actually negotiating for a specific job, because like I mentioned earlier, you want to reference projects and things that came up in the interview when you're negotiating for more based on your value and your experience. But there are probably some projects that you're particularly proud of that you think really highlight your skills and your value as a junior in your field. So list those out and submit both of these things, both your salary research and your unique value adds, to your PM on Friday. I will be in Slack after this lesson just to make sure that any questions are answered. So there is a thread in the channel. Please go through, drop any questions you have in there, and I'll respond to them as quickly as possible. But hopefully you all feel more confident about how to approach salary negotiations, both at the very beginning in a phone screen and at the end when you are actually clinching the offer. And hopefully you feel a little bit more informed about how to navigate multiple offers or interviewing for multiple jobs at the same time. So please ask your questions, share any feedback that you have on today's lesson. If there's things that you would have liked to hear or see, would love to hear your thoughts. But thank you everyone for joining, and have a great week ahead. Take care.